relative to the aggregate soil or land operating at central part of North America. That is, in fact, not true, and is part of the mind control systems and operations that have been going on, particularly since 1861, after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, and 1871, February the 2nd, which you all know, when the coup d'etat operatives came out of the closet with their political platform dealing or constructed under the Ku Klux Klan, which is known as the Democratic Party, and what is also known as the Demo platform, etc., contrary to and repugnant to the Constitution for the United States, and repugnant to the obligations to all the treaties superseding the Constitution for the United States that operates on the land, the aggregate land for the true American peoples, etc., sometimes connotatively referred to as the indigenous people, Aboriginal people, and also connotatively referred to as Indians, but in fact are actually the descendants of the land of the ancient Canaanites, Moabites, in short, Moors. But I want to share with you conceptually some facts so that we can continue in our ongoing activities of the natural people of the land reclaiming their lost estate on multiple levels. And of course, most of you are already aware that the principle of estate expands far beyond what the average natural people have been taught to think that it is, and of course, lacking knowledge of what it actually means extensively and lawfully, including recognition of the denied or suppressed legal processes relative to getting back to the lawful status of the people. We're going to go in the future, we'll be dealing more in depth. Myself and Dr. G have been conversing with some of these things in this past week. And of course, we've had many people call from around the country and from around the continent and from other parts of America in reference to these matters. And this is one of the reasons why we're reviewing or regurgitating some of the facts in relationship to the bottomry instruments, and one which we mentioned in our presentment title, marriage license, which is really a bond, etc. And by most people not being aware of the fact that it's actually a bond traded on the stock market, etc., and being under the misconception that it is a divine instrument related to the honorable beauty and innocence of matrimony in the face of our creators and our mothers and fathers and our forefathers, etc., in honor of which the marriage certificate absolutely is not. Unfortunately, many of the people not knowing that it is a corporate state contract that intercedes with the divine nature of the mating of male and female in harmony with divine laws of nature, and is actually more akin to and more aligned with human trafficking and sales. And of course, most people are not aware of the fact that the marriage license was constructed mainly by the Daughters of the American Revolution. So write this down. The marriage license was constructed by the Daughters of the American Revolution for the Bishopric of Rome in relationship to their operative mercenary contractual operations for the popes of Rome, who are indeed the Vatican Order and the owners of the United States Corporation Company. And via spaces misrepresented to other obligations, duties, debts, and what you would call abandonments of rights and liberties that are not said or spoken. Say, for instance, a member of the clergy would say to participants in the bottom reinstrument known as a marriage license, and they will make statements along this line. And remember this as you hear this statement. By the power vested in me by the state of Delaware, I pronounce you man and wife. You'll hear those statements according to the corporate state that the people may be operating in those particular jurisdictions. And keep in mind that those particular jurisdictions are abstracts on paper connected to and related to corporate entities, constructs on paper, having nothing at all to do with the aggregate land, L-A-N-D, the aggregate soil, having nothing whatsoever to do with the aggregate soil. And so it's important for people to have a concept, a true concept of jurisdictional placements distinguished from organic land placements or geographic territorial placements. From a political perspective and fact and reality, it's also vital that the people are very clear to make the distinction between, as an example, the political metaphor, as an example, state of Delaware, state of Pennsylvania, state of New Jersey, distinguished from the political metaphor, Delaware State Republic, Pennsylvania State Commonwealth, New Jersey State Republic. So when you hear Pennsylvania State Commonwealth, that is a political metaphor that relates to the legitimate operations by treaty and constitution on the aggregate land, distinguished from human trafficking operations by corporate venues via state of Pennsylvania, etc., or state of Delaware, or state of New Jersey, or any of the states of entity constructs that have been operate jurisdictionally, exercising civil jurisdictional powers de facto on the land, particularly since 1861, and particularly more distinctly since 1871, February 2nd, dealing with what is known as the U.S. democracy also. I would like to share with you, for those of you who didn't, or it never dawned on you, why clergy members, when they exercise the bottom reinstrument, which they are what you would call a third party facet operative, actually a fourth party operative, or you might call an interloper operative in the operations. And this would be known as their true oath. Now, the concepts that most people would have, that when the sectal member of the clergy says, by the power vested in me by the state of Delaware, I pronounce you man and wife, it does not dawn on the average person, because they're usually concerned or involved with going through the beauty of the ceremony, all of the finance that is spent, all of the happy people and family members that are around, and they're waiting for the reception, etc., and they're not paying attention to the details of what is stated. So when the clergy member of the Roman Curia says, by the power vested in me by the state of Delaware, I pronounce you man and wife, it doesn't dawn on the participants that that matrimonial contract power is vested by the corporate state, having nothing to do with the divine creator, Allah, Yahweh, Harold Brahms, the Buddha, etc., Confucius, or any of the divine images or the metaphors or the anthropomorphic positions of the prophets or Prophet Muhammad, etc., that people may use in their different religious positions. There's an assumption that it is a pathway to what we would refer to as the divine, the creator, Allah, God, etc., those concepts. And of course, they need to be aware of the fact that while the people in general are trained from childhood to assume that when the clergy says the word God, that they're making reference to the creator or the source of life for all of us, etc., when in fact they're actually talking about the vested power of the owners of the corporate state that vest their power by delegation of the bishopric via this Roman curia member who would hold the role of the man of the cloth, etc. And so I will share with you from the congressional records, because remember, even these people that you have assumed were just political heads, quote unquote, representing people or the land. Actually, they're representatives for the corporate operations of the popes of Rome through the bishopric order and through the United States Corporation Company, the states of political construct jurisdictions, and the municipalities, townships, and boroughs under admiralty, maritime, etc., rules of booty and prize. And so the bottomry instrument known as the marriage license would come under the secret oath of the clergy to the popes of Rome. And I'll share with you what most of you are already aware of, but however, for those of you who are not aware of this, I will share with you this for you to also recognize the connection, actual and factual, between the clergy that you thought loved Jesus, God, Allah, etc., and the popes of Rome, etc., contrary to what has been told to you, i.e., and this would also show you the misrepresentation of their positions with the people at large, as well as their misrepresentations of themselves and the operations of these contractual adhesion instrumentalities known as bottomry instruments, which would include the marriage certificates and birth certificates, etc., and driver's licenses, etc. So I'll share with you and do your own research. This would be available to you for those of you who have libraries, which you should have. You can do this research in your own library, and you can also go into the congressional records for the United States Corporation Company and find this document yourself. And those of you who over the last year or two have acquired the study drive, flash drive from Dr. Naila in the House of Reawakening Minds, you would have this congressional record from the Senate on that flash drive, and it is known as the Secret Treaty of Verona. And so many of you are already aware of this, but for those of you who are not aware and who have been participating with instrumentalities from the corporate state to know the truth about what is happening with you, with your estate, in relationship to these people that you assume that were dealing with you in honor, and they actually were not dealing with you in honor, never were, and are not. So I'm going to go from the congressional records registered in the House of Representatives, the congressional record, and the Senate extract from the 1916 operations of the corporation operations for the United States Corporation Company. Senator Owen, I wish to put in the record the secret Treaty of Verona, quote unquote, of November 22nd, 1822, showing what the ancient conflict is between the rule of the few and the rule of the many. I wish to call the attention of the Senate to this treaty because it is the threat of this treaty which was the basis of the quote-unquote Monroe Doctrine. It throws a powerful white light upon the conflict between monarchical government and government by the people. The Holy Alliance, under the influence of Metternich, the Premier of Austria, in 1822, issued this remarkable secret document, Secret Treaty of Verona. Now, note, you all, that the treaty has 7 sections, but I'm going to read up until Article 3 for the sake of our presentment tonight. Secret Treaty of Verona, American Diplomatic Code, 1778 to 1884, Volume 2, Elliott, page 179. The undersigned specially authorized to make some additions to the Treaty of the Holy Alliance after having exchanged their respective credentials, have agreed as follows. Article 1. The high contracting powers, being convinced that the system of representative government is equally as incompatible with the monarchical principles as the maxim of the sovereignty of the people with the divine right, engage mutually in the most solemn manner to use all that their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments in whatever country it may exist in Europe, and to prevent it being introduced to those countries where it is not yet known. Article 2. As it cannot be doubted that the liberty of the press is the most powerful means used by the pretended supporters of the rights of nations to the detriment of those princes, the high contracting parties promise reciprocally to adopt all proper measures to suppress it, not only in their own states, but also in the rest of Europe. Article 3, and pay close attention to Article 3, because this is the oath that all the clergy that have been telling you, by the power vested in me by the state of Delaware, I do pronounce you man and wife, etc. This is their oath. It's not to Allah, it's not to Prophet Muhammad, it's not to Yeshua, it's not to the Jesus image, it is not to any of the prophets, it is not to anything divine, it is to the popes of Rome. Hear the following. Article 3, Secret Treaty of Verona, Oath of the Clergies. Convinced that the principles of religion contribute most powerfully to keep nations in the state of passive obedience, which they owe to their princes. The high contracting parties declare it to be their intention to sustain in their respective states those measures which the clergy may adopt with the aim of ameliorating their own interests, intimately connected with the preservation of the authority of the princes, and the contracting powers join in offering their thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them, and solicit his constant cooperation in their views of submitting the nations. So Article 3, and that's the secret oath that the clergy have to the popes of Rome while going in houses that they told you are houses of God, and have been promoting Jesus and the other prophets to the face of the people, but in secret, their pledge and their allegiance and their fidelity is pledged to the Pope of Rome, and they themselves are secret clergy members of the bishopric of Rome. That goes for the Eastern churches, the Orthodox churches, and the Protestant churches. This is why you hear them make this statement. By the power vested in me by the state of Delaware, I pronounce you man and wife. So they adhered you to the popes of Rome under their human trafficking, and the people thought their pledge was to the Creator, God, or the source, etc. And indeed, it was not. That's an adhesion contract. It's a bottomry instrument, totally misrepresented, and the negative spirit or energy is cast with that instrumentality. And by that instrumentality, the corporate state claims control of the eggs in the womb, unhatched, and then later with the birth certificates, they claim the eggs that do hatch, and they're all claimed by the popes of Rome through the bishopric with the help of your corner store clergy, who most of whom have a skull and bones agreement, which you have heard of, known as a 501c3 clergy agreement. This is why they don't talk about these things to the public. And this is also why most of them will pretend to have no knowledge of what I just exposed to you. However, it's incumbent upon you, the people yourselves, to begin to practice going back into the principle of learning and reading and researching for yourselves to comprehend fundamental contract principles and comprehend the fact and know the fact that the marriage license is an adhesion contract to the Pope of Rome, having nothing to do at all with divinity whatsoever. And in many factors, and it's very often, this is again why unknown to most people that enter into these adhesion contracts, who later in the experiences of their relationships may become confused when commercial mercenary operatives operating under Article 39 of police powers comes into their homes and takes their children, even without court orders, and people have problems claiming their children because they are assuming that the children are theirs, not knowing that the clergy are part of the network of not saving souls, but collecting souls for the popes of Rome. And one of those instrumentalities is the misrepresented marriage certificate. It is a bottomry instrument. It is an adhesion contract. It is misrepresented, and it is constructed for human trafficking. And from its root, it actually sets a negative spirit in the otherwise, without it, divine relationship between man and woman. Contrary to nature, contrary to divinity, contrary to the spirit of love, but absolutely connected to human trafficking on multiple levels, as well as an instrument used to escheat all future inheritances and the estates of people. That's a fact. Write it down. Any questions?
I'm just trying to deal with this. No, that's one.
So, as a reminder, for many of you who are listening, who you want to do some back research on this, and we'll do this in the future, because we were also talking earlier about expanding on the corruption, the spirit of corruption done by the priesthood in relationship to the marriage certificate. And I say this absolutely: do not confuse the marriage certificate and the operations around it with the natural matrimony operations of love and union between man and woman in nature. They are not partners at all. And in the future, when we're going to go into this more in depth, this particular instrumentality adhesion contract in the future, and when we do that, we'll go into the commercial mercenary operations of Article 39 and in detail, and we'll bring it out and show it to you, etc. So you'll know why people that you thought were law officers, they're actually commercial mercenaries for the popes of Rome, and this is why they usually send them. You commonly know them as police, members of the Fraternal Order of Police, and they go and they kidnap children from women, and women are denied due process or the claim of their own children because there's an assumption, rightful, divinely, by the women that she produced that child come from her womb, and then these operatives from the corporate state arbitrarily take children at will from their homes under the Christian black codes, under the authority of the states of corporations, which the people are assuming are law officers when they're really contractual enforcers, commercial mercenaries for the secret treaty of Verona, pretending to be officers, i.e., because when you say officer, you're implying that that person or that being is a constitutionally constructed and elected representative in harmony with treaties and constitutions on behalf of the people, when that is absolutely not true and is absolutely the opposite. They're in power by the corporate state operatives actually to regulate the actual physical human capital, just as they regulate cattle, etc. And it absolutely operates from that perspective. Relative to the instrumentality known as the marriage license, we'll go into details more with you in the future in relationship to that instrumentality. Also, some details into fundamental contract law and rebuttal of contract and reversion or rescission of signature in relationship to the bodily instruments which have been misrepresented to the people and has actually been over the years creating more damage, both spiritually, politically, economically, and relative to heritability than most people have ever assumed those instruments to be. And they've been enforced violently against women. And but again, you must have a concept of your right of reversion of estate too. And this is again why trust law or the principles of trust law are not taught to our people. And the misconceptions of the obligations of these contracts to the corporate state is an assumed jurisdictional position in relationship to their viewing of the people at large and their activities on how they respond to you, how they treat you, etc. And also in relationship to what they would call states' arguments in relationship to women who are trying to retrieve their kidnapped children from these beings who you assumed and emphasized assumed were authority when actually they're human traffickers. And that marriage license has much to do with it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Assuming when you say the marriage license is actually a signing over of the eggs, the unfertilized eggs, what?
But that's not presented.
Wait a minute. Let me finish. What does that mean in terms of an unmarried woman who has a child? Is it going back to when whoever in her lineage was married that gave her? And
this is your answer to that.
Yeah.
So when you look into Christian black codes of 1724, adopted into all the states of the corporate states, etc., you will see that the condition of the child is condition of the mother. And also you answered your own question by being aware of the fact that the condition of the child is condition of the mother. And you also recognize when you go into the principle of them establishing the birth certificate to make claim on the eggs that hatch. So from initially, their those de facto, their claim is on the eggs before hatching, i.e., the womb of the women, etc. And then for the ones that hatch, logically, if one has or has been registered at seed and company with a birth certificate, which is again why very often they intimidate women and don't let them out of the hospitals unless they sign a birth certificate, because they create the bond with that. And so even if the woman is not married, they also make an assumption claim. And this is what is called assumed jurisdiction. That would be in personam jurisdiction. So write that down, you all. In personam jurisdiction. You can look that up in your law book, etc. We won't go into that because we don't want to expand the past that and change the subject matter, but that's also operative relative also to the jurisdictional power